Hi, I'm Denny. I'm with Springfield Leather. We've been doing some beginners carving classes here at the store, and we thought maybe we could share some of them with you on video. It probably won't be quite as intense as an actual class, but maybe you can get something out of it, we hope. To start off with, you'll need a piece of paper with a pattern on it. That's what I've got right here with a pretty simple tooling pattern. You'll need a piece of tracing film and a pencil. And the way I usually do it is I will put my tracing film on the paper and just draw around everything that I've got here. Start with the outside perimeter, and then there's a border on the inside that I'll do, and then I'll start with all the floral features. This tracing film, a lot of times it'll want to kind of crawl on you, so you need to relax what you're doing and let it go back to shape. That way it doesn't get away from you and you don't have a bunch of squirrely lines on your pattern. Okay, now I've got the border and the outside perimeter. I'm going to start and I'm going to do my flower. And you want to be careful and get as close as you can to these lines, but if you are imperfect like I am, you won't hit them all the time, so don't worry about it too much. Just get as close as you can. Notice I picked that up so I could see what I'd just drawn. Now I'm going to do my flower stem. A lot of people don't understand, but the flower and the stem actually dictate this pattern. If you don't get those pretty close to the way they're supposed to be, you'll be very confused. I've got the flower and the stem. Now I'm going to go around and do all these leaves. And I'm just using the regular pencil on this. You don't have to get fancy with anything special. If you should happen to slip and let your pattern move, just relax and set your pattern back on there the best you can. There, I think I've got my pattern drawn. Now the next step we'll go through is I'll take a piece of leather. Right now we're doing a 4-inch coaster. That's what this pattern is for. And I'll just take this 4-inch piece of leather and I'll take and just spritz it with a little bit of water. You don't need to go through a big process to case it and everything. I just called it quick case. I'll just spritz it with water. You don't want to get it just saturated. Just get it pretty wet where it turns darker. Then you can put your pattern on top. But first, I will take and set these wing dividers, which is a tool that we'll be using, at the same width as this border that I drew. And then I'll set it on my leather and just draw a line around there. Now I've got my border established, and then I'll set my pattern on top there. And then I'll just go over, and I'll use the same pencil that I used to trace it the first time, and I'll just go over that tracing that I made with the pencil. Your leather has to be damp or it won't take this impression. But you don't have to make this impression really deep, just enough that you can see it. because this is just where you're going to be using your swivel knife to cut these lines. And if you get off and make a mistake, you can correct that when you cut it with your knife, but if your lines are too deep, then they'll show even after you've done your correction. You'll notice this, the paper does crawl, and like I was telling you before, if it does, just relax what you're doing and let your paper go back into its original shape. Alright, I've got my pattern drawn on there. If y'all can see that. Now, before I start anything else, let's go over the tools that we're going to be using. I've already showed you the wing dividers, and this is a swivel knife. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. I use a swivel knife with a 3/8 straight blade. Some people might prefer a smaller blade, like a 1/4-inch blade, and some people might use an angled blade. But I find this straight blade I can do about anything I want to do with. And like I said, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. They're adjustable in length this way. So just get yourself, you're always better off buying the best knife or the best tool that you can buy. But as a beginner's knife, you know, you can get some that are pretty inexpensive. Next would be a flower center. And that's just what the name implies. It's the center of a flower feature. And they make those in 1,000 different styles. Then is a beveler. And they make these in different sizes, different textures. Some are fairly flat, some are fairly steep. I use a steep beveler myself with a checkered pattern. I find that goes pretty well with just about everything that I do. Next is a backgrounder, and there again they make lots of different backgrounders. This is a matte backgrounder. They make different sizes and different shapes of these. They also make what they call a bar grounder, which is just a series of beads. They're a little bit more difficult to master, but they look good. But for now, we're just going to use this matte backgrounder. Next is a pear shader. There again, they make these in different sizes and different textures. I'm using a checkered pattern on this one, and it's a fairly small one. They also make what they call a thumbprint, which is a little longer than a pear shader and not quite as wide. But you can use either end of it, and that's what I use generally. But for this beginner's stuff here, we're going to use this pear shader. Next is a veiner. They make these in different sizes and different arcs. This one is a lined veiner. They make scallop veiners. You know, the sky is the limit on all these tools, and they were all developed for one purpose, but nowadays people use them for a lot of different things. This is a camouflage tool, and there again, different sizes, different textures. This is a kind of a medium size with a line texture to it. And lastly is a mule's foot. This is just a decorative tool, and it's a fairly small one. Like the name implies, it's shaped like a mule's foot. But anyway, that's all the tools that we're going to use. But to to start this off with on our leather, I'm going to start with the flower center. And I'm going to set it in the center of this flower that I drew, but I'm just going to tap it lightly, just so I can see where it is. And I do this so that when I start cutting this pattern with my knife, I'll know where to cut to in the center of that flower. But then I'll get my swivel knife. And for those of you that have never used a swivel knife before, you just use the corner of this blade. You never use the whole blade to cut with. So you've always got it tipped forward like this. You never want to tip it side to side. If you do, you'll undercut your pattern, which is highly undesirable, but it happens sometime. But anyway, I'm going to start. I'm going to press my knife in. Depending on the leather that you're using, a thinner piece of leather you don't want to cut as deeply. A thicker piece you want to cut a little deeper. General rule of thumb, try to cut about halfway through your piece of leather, but that's just a rule of thumb. It's nothing definite. There's always exceptions to every rule. But if you'll notice, I'm pulling the knife towards myself, but then when I get in a certain position, then I end up pushing it. And a lot of you might have trouble when you first start pushing your knife. You don't have to do that. You can move your leather around where you're pulling it at all times. But if you practice and learn how to push your knife in those spots, you won't have to move your leather as often. But there again, I'm starting with the flower. Then I'm going to do this flower stem. And when I make these cuts, some of them are cuts that run into another cut. I will keep the same pressure on them, on those cuts. But I'm getting ready to do one here that just ends up out in the middle of nowhere. If I can explain this, this cut starts up here and it ends down here, but it doesn't end abruptly. So I'll start deep with my knife, but when I get down towards this end, I'll lighten up and just let it float out to where it's nothing. That way it doesn't look like, okay, I'm done here, we're going to stop. It gives it a more natural look. Most times I will cut the border first, but I haven't on this, so I'm going to be careful and not go over that border line. There's lots of rules you can follow, but none of them are really cut and dried. You can make your own rules as you go. Just kind of try and plan out what you're doing. Make sure you don't make it harder on yourself at a later stage in the game. If you notice, I can cut a lot smoother line than I can draw. And most of you will find that to be true after you've gotten comfortable with your knife. Everyone's a little tentative at first, but just remember, you're not supposed to be perfect. You're supposed to be learning how to do this. And the only way to learn is to get in there and try it. But if you notice, I'm just floating these lines out that don't end abruptly. Alright, now I'll go back and cut this border line. And borders, a lot of people have trouble with. Just watch where you're getting ready to cut and not where you have already cut. because if you're watching what you've already done, you aren't watching what you're getting ready to do. All right. There we have our whole pattern cut. Now, after that, the first thing we'll do is we'll bevel all these lines that we cut. And I'll start with this beveler. This is a dead weight, by the way. It's just a bag filled with some heavy stuff, and all it does is hold this down so you don't have to chase this piece of leather around. But I'm going to start right here. The beveler, you hold straight up and down. You don't want to tip it side to side or front and back. You want to stay as straight up and down as you can. And when you start out, you'll probably have to hit it once and then move it, hit it again and then move it. But you'll notice when you do that, you create little tracks, little lines there. So you'll have to go back over them. But in reality, what you're trying to do is learn how to walk this tool. And you use your mallet or your maul, whichever one you're using, as actually it's the motor. When you hit it, kind of drives your tool forward a little bit. And that's something I didn't go over with you already, but you can use a mallet or a maul, whichever you're most comfortable with. It doesn't really matter. For carving, you don't want a real heavy weight tool. You want something that's fairly lightweight, because you're going to be swinging it a lot. And you don't want to hold this like a hammer. If you notice how I'm holding this is like this, not like this. You don't want to hold it like this. You want to hold it like this, so you can use your wrist as a fulcrum balance point. Excuse me. Okay. Stay in these lines just as close as you can. If you get off a little bit, you just do. You just have to make that up somewhere else. But like I said, just stay as close as you can. Let's just say I haven't finished it yet, but let's say I finished doing all the petals on this flower. Remember how we talked about fading the lines out when we cut them with our swivel knife, the ones that didn't end up in an abrupt stop? I'm going to show you how to bevel those lines right now. So I'm going to start with this one right here. Okay, now just listen to my beveler, to my maul when I end up here. But if you'll notice that line, it just keeps getting shallower here until it just out into nothing. And you do that just by tapping your mallet lighter. All right. Now there's no reason to for you guys to watch me as I bevel all the rest of these lines, because that could take quite a while. So just remember, go around each line that you've cut and bevel each one, and fade those ending lines out into nothing, and that's about all there is to the beveling. Next time we'll go with some more. We'll start using our backgrounder, and then we'll go with our pear shader and show you how to do the rest of it. Thank you.